The boar had torn him open from groin to breastbone. The stink of blood, wine, and unguent filled the king's chambers until it seemed to thicken each breath. Eddard Stark stood at the foot of the bed, the furs about his shoulders too warm for the fevered air, and watched the man he had loved, for all his failings, gasp like a landed fish. "Right?" Robert croaked, and the quill scratched under Eddard's hand. "Lord Eddard Stark, protector of the realm, until my heir until..." The word stalled. Robert's eyes, bluer than winter sky even now, found Ned's. For a heartbeat, there was no king in the bed, only the friend who had followed him into Balon Greyjoy's halls and into the madness at the bells, the boy who had loped beside him in the vale when their beards were scarcely grown. "Until my heir," Ned said quietly. He did not write the name he believed, just did not write Stannis. The paper would carry the sense. The seal would carry the weight. There would be time for law later. Law and cold truth. Robert laughed, a rattle that ended in pain. "Your stiff neck'll doom us yet, Ned." The thick hand groped at air. "My boys, see to them. No traps, no knives in the dark. Keep the realm whole." The hand found Ned's and squeezed with surprising strength. "Promise me." It was an old phrase that scraped against an old wound. Ned bowed his head. "I promise." When he left the chamber, Ser Barristan followed like a ghost of steel and honor. The Lord Commander moved as if the very floor quaked beneath him. "He has ours," Selmy said. "I know." Ned's fingers were ink-stained and smelled of wax. The impression of Robert's stag was cooling. He breathed it in as if it could ward off the storm he felt building. "Ser Barristan." "Name it, my lord. Your oath is to the king. When I send for you, come. Bring only those you trust to stand for the realm, not for a house." Selmy's eyes were grave. "I have sworn to protect the king. Ishal come." They parted in shadows. Ned climbed the tower steps that led to the hand's solar, aware of the pounding in his chest, the feel of every beat against the inside of his breastbone. Outside, King's Landing sprawled under a haze, roofs and domes and alleyways trickling down to the glitter of the Blackwater. Bells tolled low for the king's suffering, or for something older and more inevitable, and gulls wheeled like bits of ash on the wind. Renly Baratheon waited in the solar with the ease of a man in a hunting field, lounging in a chair as if it were a saddle. He rose when Ned entered, green doublet bright against the tower of the hand's stone. "My brother?" he asked, with that strange blend of hope and dread. "Soon," Ned said. He set the parchment down upon the table, pushed it toward Renly so the Baratheon could see the black scrawl and red wax. "He has named me protector until his heir rule in his stead." Renly read. His eyes flicked up. "Until his heir," he repeated. "He did not name Joff." "I would not write a lie," Ned said. "You know what Jon Arryn died for asking. I have found answers he did not live to share." Renly's gaze sharpened. "Then we have one chance. Cersei must be taken with the dawn. All of them, the lion's cubs in one basket. I told you before, and still you hesitated. Do not hesitate now. You have friends enough if you act swiftly." In the corridor beyond the door, a shadow moved and withdrew. Varys, soft-footed, entered as if the air had pushed him. "My lords," he breathed. His perfume floated delicate as treachery. "Forgive my intrusion. A sad day above us. A dangerous night around us." Ned studied him. "You told me once, Lord Varys, that you serve the realm." "I like to think so," Varys murmured, pressing his fingers together. "The realm, yes. 1,000 blades in a ring and 1,000 lives drawn taut across them. There is one way, Lord Stark. If you will hear a little man's counsel." Renly's mouth twisted. "We have my counsel, and better than yours, Spider." "Better, perhaps, for your hopes," Varys returned smoothly. "Worse for small folk, for order, for peace. Renly would have us snatch lions in their sleep and present them bound to your mercy." His lids lowered. "You are not a man to murder children in their beds, my lord. Yet if you move public, the queen will move first. The city watch is of the city, and the city is of coin. The master of coin has deep purses. Ned's jaw tightened. His mind flashed to Littlefinger's sly smile. His hands hovering, always hovering, near the keys of the realm's strongboxes. I will not trust Peter Baelish, he said. I will not sell the city's honor for gold. Oh, honor, Renly said softly. Is it honor to let the lions roar?
Ned.
Enough. Ned looked from one to the other and found in each a piece of the truth, bitter and necessary. Cersei Lannister will not flee. She will be confronted before the court, with Roberts will read aloud and her children revealed for what they are. He looked to Varys. You will carry word to Ser Barristan. He and those of the Kingsguard who remember what vows mean will hold the king's peace for 1 hour. No more. Renly, you spoke of 200 loyal swords. I have them, Renly said. He rose, eager, the scent of roses clinging to him from Tyrell gifts. Before dawn, we seal every gate to the residence. We make a ring of steel about the queen's chambers and the princes and the princesses. We do it not with knives but with names. Lord Protector, Lord Commander, Lord Renly. The small folk will wake to an order, not a bloodbath. Do it, Ned said. I will not seize, but I will secure. At midday we hold court. The will is read. The realm hears the truth. The truth, Varys murmured, as if tasting the word. It has toppled thrones before, when they had left him. Renly to rouse his men with the smiling confidence that made followers bloom around him like hedges in spring. Varys to glide through the Red Keep's arteries. Ned stood alone and felt the weight that had been pressing slowly since the hand's pin had been fastened to his chest at Winterfell. He poured a finger of watered wine and watched the thin line arc into his cup. It seemed to him for a moment that the arc was a blade. He sent for Tomard and Desmond and Hallis Mullen, and the hard-eyed Northmen came tired and staunch as ever. Their numbers had been cut by Jory's death. The memory of Jory's young grin and easy bow caught at Ned like a knife. But what men remained would stand between him and the sea itself if he asked it. He told them what he planned, and they nodded grimly. Aye, Hallis said, and if the lions bare their teeth, we'll break them. We will not be the ones to begin this with blood, Ned said. But if blood is offered, we will not be spared it. Near dawn the keep had a hush that felt like the pause between a heartbeat and another. Renly's men slid into position with a discipline that surprised Ned. Posted at doors and along corridors in pairs, all in plain cloaks but with the green of the storm and the rose emboss of Highgarden on their hilts. The gold cloaks of the city watch saw them and muttered. Janos Slint himself stumped up the tower of the hand, face red and eyes calculating. Protector, he greeted, trying the title like a coin on a tooth. I hear there's to be some sort of reading. There is, Ned said. You will array your men about the throne room and keep peace. No erests, no blades. Your men are to obey only Ser Barristan or myself. Slint's mouth worked. He smelled of onion and sweat, and the gold chain around his neck flowed into his flesh as if softened by greed. Lord Peter said. Lord Peter is master of coin, Ned said, in a voice that held Winterfell's snow. You serve the king's peace. Slint looked into Ned's eyes and found no bargain there. He swallowed and bowed clumsily. Aye, peace. By the time the sun cleared the mists and set the river alight, the Red Keep was ringed with steel and silence. Cersei emerged from her rooms like a queen on a festival day, velvet and gold layered against her, her hair agleam the color of fresh-spun straw. Joffrey stalked at her side, trying to imitate a stag's dignity and managing only a scowl's petulance. Tommen padded behind, clutching a toy knight. Myrcella's face was a careful mask. At their backs, Ser Meryn and Ser Boros had their white cloaks pinned with lions' heads. The hound moved like a shadow of violence. He glanced at the Stormland swords arrayed in quiet pairs, at the northern faces that had the look of men who had seen winter's teeth, and his mouth twisted. He said nothing. Ned met them at the doors of the throne room. Your Grace, he said to Cersei, without warmth or insult. She let her gaze travel lazily over the men at his back. She ignored Renly. Renly, in turn, did not look at her at all. "Is this what you dare?" Cersei asked at last. "A coup behind a dying man's sheets?" "It is law before all," Ned said. "The king's will be read. Thereafter, the realm will be governed by the king's true heir." Joffrey's hand went to the sword they had given him for his name day. His mouth bared his teeth. "I am the king. Your claim will be weighed," Ned said. "Servaristan." Selmy stepped forward, and the white of his cloak seemed less cloth than oath. "Your grace," he said to Cersei, and his voice held a weight that bent the air. "The Lord Protector has the king's last written command. We do not make war here. We do not draw in the throne room. We hear, then we speak." Cersei's smile was a knife's glint held low. "Do your hearing. But know this, if one hair on my children's heads is harmed by your plots, Stark, I will sow your north with salt." "Your threats are wind," Renly said, almost lazily. "The only salt you will see is your own tears if you try your claws here." They entered. The Iron Throne brooded, a river of frozen blades in a bundled rage. Ned took it for the first and last time, not to sit but to stand at its foot. The small council filed in, Pycelle shuffling and blinking like an old turtle, Peter Baelish smiling with the corners of his mouth and nowhere else, Varys theatrical in his sorrow, Renly girt with easy confidence. The hall was full, and the buzz of whispers rolled like bees. Ned lifted Robert's parchment high, and the sight of the seal silenced the room as a storm calms flies. He broke it, his voice carried clean as a bell as he read, word by word, each syllable a stake in the ground. When he reached "Protector of the Realm," he felt a kind of cold enter him. Cersei listened as if to a song she found boring. When he finished, she held out her hand like a queen for a cup of wine. "Touching," she said. "If only useless parchment could tilt blood." She turned to face the hall. "Joffrey is the king. He is Robert's eldest son. Any man who denies it denies the king." Ned did not raise his voice. He spoke of Jaime Lannister's golden seed, of hair that bred true, of bastards in the city with coal-black hair like Robert's. He did not name Gendry, but he could taste the seaside forge in his mouth, the memory of that steady young face. He spoke of Jon Arryn and Stannis Baratheon, of a book of lineages stiff as old leather. He spoke of truth, not gossip, and the room's hum turned brittle. Littlefinger's eyes were bright with interest. Varys watched the hall. Cersei laughed. It was almost gentle. "You bring me a book and a bastard's head to weigh against a prince," she said. "And you expect me to bow? The gods laugh at you, Stark. I laugh with them." She turned to leave. Renly's men at the doors did not move. Ned set the parchment down and lifted his hand. "In the name of Robert of House Baratheon, first of his name, I declare Cersei of House Lannister and her children under ward of the crown until the realm has judged the truth. Until then, they are to be held in gentle keeping. Ser Barristan, do your duty." For an instant everything hung upon a thread. "Mare." Wyntrant's eyes darted. Boros Blunt swallowed. The hound's fingers flexed against his sword. Cersei's nostrils flared. Barristan Selmy turned and walked to the queen. He bowed, not to the woman, but to duty, and said quietly, "Your Grace, if you please." Something broke in Cersei's face. She hissed between her lids like a snake. Joffrey shoved past Barristan to clamber toward the throne, but Renly stepped lightly into his path and set a hand upon the boy's breast with a cousin's laziness that covered iron. "Not yet," he said, smiling that infuriating smile. "There will be time to sit in chairs. My mother will not be caged." Joffrey spat. "No one cages lions," Renly murmured. "They are merely moved to different dens." The hound had not drawn. He looked at Ned, at Barristan, at Cersei's children. He sighed and shifted his feet. "I'll see the boy doesn't piss himself," he told no one. The gold cloaks ringed the hall, and Janos Slint's face held oil and calculation. He seemed to waver like heat above stone. He glanced to Littlefinger. Littlefinger gave him a blank, courteous look, as if they were in a counting house. Slint saw that he was alone and commander still of his own neck. He lifted a hand and his men stood easy. In that moment the realm tipped. Cersei and her children were conducted to rooms in Maegor's Holdfast where the queen's fury could burn without kindling the city. Ser Meryn and Ser Boros paced outside those doors, and Renly's men paced with them, friendly and smiling. One could see in the latter the promise that any hand extended for a dagger would be broken at the wrist. The hound stalked with a restlessness that made maids scuttle. Ned returned to the council chamber and took off the hand's pin. He set it on the table where it gleamed like winter sun on ice. He spoke to Pycelle and spoke to Varys and did not speak to Littlefinger. "The king is dying," he said. "Before this day passes, he will be gone. We must send ravens to Dragonstone, to Stannis, to summon him to court, and to Storm's End, to Renly's seat. Let the High Septon be called to witness, and the great lords who can ride swiftly enough to answer, recalls to the capital. We will hold a great council." Littlefinger lifted a delicate hand. "And if the council does not choose as you would like, my lord? If it chooses, say, the queen's lovely boy or perhaps our dear Lord Renly, who would wear a crown nicely?" "The council will choose the realm's peace," Ned said. "As do I." Littlefinger smiled as if at a particularly amusing sum. "Peace is dear, to be sure, but it is the most expensive thing one can buy." "You will not buy it," Ned said. "You will serve it. For that I will have your resignation from the council accepted and your books examined by a more honest man. If you are innocent of theft, you will survive the scrutiny." Silence stretched like a bow drawn. Varys looked down to hide his mouth. Pycelle bristled faintly and then wilted. Renly watched, unblinking. Baelish only smiled. "I am hurt, my lord, wounded. But if you wish me to take my leave of the small council's love, I am moved by your own." He rose and bowed deeply. "Shall I give the keys of the realm's coffers to, say, Ser Vardis Egen? No? Or do you still have faith in the good sense of bankers?" "Wyman Manderly," Ned said. "He is a lord and has some fat to spare. Summon him if the gods are good and his horses sturdy. Until then, the keys remain in a lock I hold." Baelish's eyes brightened. "How brisk the north. Very well." He swept away like a courtier in a jesting pageant, splendid and dangerous. He went straight to his own apartments to gather papers and wrap his slyness in cloaks. The day would carry him where it wished. If it wished him to the Vale through secret doors or to the river through clever alleys, he would go. He left behind, like a spider leaving silk, 2 glances and a promise that were as binding as rope. One to Janos Slint, one to a soft-spoken knight of the Kingsguard whose honor was not so heavy as his belly. The promise went uncollected. Littlefinger's talent had always been the discovery of wind. He scented now the north in the throne room and the reach in Renly's smile. It set the course of his day differently than he had planned. The hour before sunset, bells tolled again. Men took off their hats in the street and women crossed themselves without knowing why. Robert Baratheon had turned his great face to the wall and slept a thin, last sleep he would not wake from. The great September gave off the smell of incense and stone and old prayers. The High Septon wore a crystal crown, and when its prisms caught the light that spilled through windows, ghosts of rainbows walked across his cheeks. Eddard stood before the bier, north in him stiff as the burned cedar of the Winterfell hall that had been his father's favorite place. He thought of the hours he had spent there as a boy, watched by wolves from carved beams, listening to Brandon laugh, listening to his father's voice, deep as lake water. Robert had been a different kind of brother, but he had been a brother nonetheless. Ned said nothing. He took a knee with his sons at his side. No, not his sons. Robb far in the north, Bran climbing gods knew what again, Rickon clinging to Catelyn's skirts. There was only Jon in black at a wall of ice, and that thought stabbed him with an old promise until he locked it in his ribs and stood. He named the hour for the council's first meeting and left Varys to carry the news to Dragonstone. The ravens went rattling into a reddening sky like pieces of night. The city did not boil as he had feared it would. It simmered. There were men in the taverns who shouted that Robert had been killed by a boar, and that the boar had a lion's tail, and others who said that the boar had actually been a northern wolf. Those men bled in alleys. Yet the ring of Renly's swords and the authority of Barristan's white cloak kept knives sheathed in the Streets nearest to the Red Keep. Merchants opened their stalls. Priests droned. Life, like a stubborn weed, pushed through stone. Sansa came to him as the sun set, her eyes red and her mouth held bravely. "They say the prince is locked away," she whispered, as if the walls were gossiping too. "They say I'll be sent home." "You will not be sent anywhere you do not wish to go," Ned said. He rested a hand on her hair, and she leaned into it like a child. She should have been arguing for her love for Joffrey, for songs. Instead, she looked small and unsure and very young. "We will write to your mother. We will bring her here." "And Arya?" Sansa said quickly. "She was with the dancing master. She says she isn't a lady at all." "She is a Stark," Ned said. "She will learn to be a lady in her way." He did not tell Sansa that he had sent for Arya, and that Arya had slipped away from her maids and had been found in the kitchens with a fistful of pastry and flour across her face like war paint, laughing. He did not tell her that when he had scolded her, Arya had looked at him with lioness eyes until his throat closed. At the same hour in the Vale, Tyrion Lannister mounted a shaggy Garen with Bronn beside him and the wind of freedom flattening his beard against his neck. The sky over the mountains of the moon was cruelly bright. The rocks were knives and the paths were noose ropes. Tyrion's ribs still ached when he laughed, which was often. "Tell me," he said to Bronn, "what kind of hand throws the queen into a pantry?" "The kind what lives to tomorrow," Bronn said, expressionless. He glanced at the shadow he dragged behind them. "And the kind that has more sense than to keep you. Kind is generous." Tyrion adjusted his saddle and thought of his father's face when he delivered himself with mountain savages in his wake. He smiled a little, and then he thought of his sister's glare and did not. News rides faster than men, and at Casterly Rock Tywin Lannister learned by Raven's darkness and by rumor's light that the queen had been set aside and the boy Joffrey penned. The Lord of Casterly Rock held the parchment on a flat hand and read each line twice. He did not curse. He did not move for a long minute. Then he called for Kevin and for maps, and for men who were good with fire. In the Riverlands, the sigils of Lannister and of sundry petty lords who scented his coin began to move along river paths and forest tracks. Villages burned because men liked to watch things burn. Lord Beric Dondarrion rode out with a small company under Ned Stark's writ to bring the mountain to heal. He found instead a storm of arrows under blackened oaks and woke later to smoke and the taste of dirt in his teeth and a priest with a red god's whispers in his ears. The hills birthed a song and a rumor all at once. A brotherhood. It was as much hope as truth. At Dragonstone, Stannis Baratheon read Eddard's letter and did not eat that day. He stood on his battlements and watched the sea darken and thought of duty, as if it were a nail he might hammer through his own palm and feel relief at the pain. Davos Seaworth said, "My lord, the Hand counsels a council. There will be law." "Law," Stannis said. The word tasted like ash. "I am Robert's heir. It is law." He looked at the red woman who had found her way to his austere halls and lit them with an alien, wavering light. Melisandre smiled as if she were watching something writhe in a brazier. "At Storm's End," she said, "a younger brother coils like a snake in the grass. At King's Landing, a wolf raises itself on its hind legs and pretends to be a man." "And which would your god burn first?" Stannis asked. "The false light," she said simply. Renly sat in his chamber with Lord Loras Tyrell's laughter in his ear and the scent of clean sweat and crushed flowers fading from the bed. "If the realm asks me to sit," Renly said, stretching, "I might not refuse. It would be ungracious." Loras turned on his elbow, handsome and light. "You do not want to be king. You want to be loved like a king. It is not the same." Renly grinned and threw a grape at him. "I want the realm not to look like a butcher's yard. If the Hand from the north can promise me that." He broke off and listened. Outside, the city hummed. "We will see." The raven from Sunspear flew like a strip of torn night and spilled ink across Ned Stark's table. Doran Martell's hems dripped courtesy and distant heat. He had read the rumors and he had weighed the names. He would not come. He would send a brother. By the time ravens tangled and unknotted themselves across half a dozen skies, The Great Council had begun to take shape. Lords came from the crownlands and the reach first, their horses glossy, their trains long. Mace Tyrell's platters arrived before he did, and his banners bunting the streets until King's Landing looked like a feast day. Houses smaller and hungrier came sniffing for favor and leftovers. From the Vale came no one. Petia Erin, the boy lord, had a mother who feared air and strangers and the color red. She clutched him to her pinched breast and wrote letters like barbed thread, blaming wolves for everything. Catelyn Stark arrived from the Riverlands at last, hair unbound from hours of hard riding, face carved with worry. She kissed her husband in a corridor without witnesses and whispered, "Edmure holds Riverrun, but the Lannisters are in the fields like foxes in a henhouse. Robb calls our banners." "He is a boy," Ned said. "He must hold." "He has your jaw," she said. "If you put him in a room and forbid him to step outside, he will leap from the window." He wanted to hold her in the Godswood's shade and let laughter grow like grass until it hid everything. But there was no time. They walked side by side into days that were mostly rooms and words. The Great Council convened beneath the vaults of the Great September, that holy ship on its hill. The High Septon presided with all the way, tea of crystal and merged mutterings. On the first day, Ser Barristan stood and recited the contents of Robert's will. On the second, Ned spoke of bloodlines and the book and the black-haired boys at the Street of Steel, and the Septon who had baptized them and liked a cup with anyone who would listen. On the third day, Stannis's letter was read aloud, clipped and contemptuous. He would not attend a council that debated whether the sky was blue. The realm would bend or break around the truth. He would not bend. On the fourth day, Renly smiled and did not declare, which was a kind of declaration in itself. On the fifth, Oberyn Martell entered like a knife and a grin and spoke with a lazy, lethal eloquence about law and about how the mountain had raped and murdered and how any man who sheltered him, or his kin or his coin, deserved a crown made of hot iron. On the sixth day, Mace Tyrell made a speech full of fat and good nature, promising bread and loyal hearts if the realm had a point to gather around that was not a flinty man on an island or a boy in a cage. On the seventh, Kevan Lannister rose and bowed and said that the Westerlands stood for law and would accept whatever verdict the council reached. Tywin had sent him to say as much, and his eyes did not flicker when Oberyn yawned. On the eighth day, Littlefinger arrived at the edge of a crowd in the September's third aisle, wearing humility like a new cloak. "My lords," he murmured later to any who would listen. "The north is very far and winter is very cold. One cannot eat honor when the harvest fails." On the ninth day, the quiet lords spoke, Redwine and Rowan and Valerion and Celtigar, and what they spoke of was ships and grain and peace. On the 10th day, the High Septon lifted his scepter and said that it was time to choose. "What do you ask?" Ned said, low enough that only Catelyn heard. "That you be who you are," she said, "and that you be who the realm needs." He had never wanted a crown. It seemed to him a thing made of knives rather than glory, a weight that would grind his bones to powder. He rose anyway. "Lords of Westeros," he said. His voice echoed from stone, and his breath stirred incense. "When I came south, it was to serve my king and return. I found murder and lies woven like rot in a barrel. I have set the queen aside and taken her children into gentle ward, not for hatred of a house but for love of law. I say this to you plain. The rightful heir of Robert Baratheon by blood is Stannis Baratheon, Lord of Dragonstone. I would bend the knee to him with a glad heart, and so should you." He paused. The weight in his chest turned, old as Lyanna's grave. "But Stannis will not come to bend. He will come to break. Renly holds a smile better than a sword. The Lannisters will fight for their pride. The Tyrells will fight for theirs. The Dornish have long memories and sharper knives than most. The North remembers and bleeds. If we crown law and murder peace in its name, we doom 100,000 small folk to die for our rightness." He lifted his head. "Therefore, and with sorrow, I say this. Let us crown not a house, but the realm. Crown a man who will swear the oaths you ask in this sept and keep them in the snow as in the sun. Crown a man with no hunger for the thing itself. If you ask it of me..." He swallowed, angered that his voice roughened. "If you ask it of me, I will wear what you place upon me for the sake of peace. And when winter breaks, I will call you again, and we will lay the truth before the gods a second time." A susurrus moved through the hall like wind through dry grass. Oberyn's smile widened just at the edges, a predator amused. Mace Tyrell's eyes shone with tears. Kevin Lannister looked as if he had swallowed something spiky. Renly, for once, did not smile. The High Septon's frail hands steadied themselves upon his scepter. "We do not make a custom here," he said softly, "but we may answer a season. The gods see the heart. They know winter from summer. We may crown a steward king, a winter king, one to hold the realm through frost and shadow and then lay the weight down. Is there any among you who objects in such force as to bring steel to it? If so, now before the altar." There were men whose lips thinned, whose hands curled. There were none who reached for hilts. Stannis' absence stood like a black pillar. Renly's ambition hovered like heat above a road. Tywin Lannister's will watched through his brother's eyes, taut as a bowstring. Mace Tyrell looked delighted. Oberyn looked entertained. The High Septon lifted both hands. "Then let it be done. Eddard of House Stark, come forward." Ned walked as if the stones had turned to water. He knelt. The crystal crown was very light and seemed a trick when it brushed his brow. Cold. "Do you swear before gods and men to guard the realm and hold your office in trust?" The High Septon intoned. "Until the breaking of the long winter, when you will call this council again and abide by its will, even should it unmake you?" "I swear," Eddard said. The word left him like breath in winter, visible, then gone. "Do you swear to keep justice for high and low, to feed the hungry and protect the helpless, to quell war and bury feuds in the snow?" "I swear." The anointing oil stank sweet and thick. The light touched crystal and made color puddle like blood on the floor. "Rise, Eddard of House Stark," the High Septon cried. "King of the Undulls and the Rhoynar and the First Men, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, keeper of the realm until summer comes again." The cheer was not thunder. It was something lower and steadier, the rumble of hundreds of men agreeing to lift their own burdens a little and to set some on his shoulders. Ned heard in it the cry of 1,000 wolves across winter hills. He rose. Catelyn's eyes filled and spilled, and he longed more than anything to put his head against her breast and close his eyes. But he stood tall and let the realm look upon him. He had broken something sacred and mended something else more vital. That night, he went to the Godswood within the Red Keep. It was a sorry thing, a knot of pale tree and stunted stream trapped by walls. But it was air and leaves and the whisper of water. He knelt and pressed his hand against bark not his own. "Forgive me," he said. He was not certain of which gods he asked it. He thought of Lyanna again and the words she had forced into his bones. "Promise me." He kissed the roughness and stood. In the morning he held court. Petitions arrived like snow, each flake unique, all equally cold. There were disputes over ship tariffs and cellars, over goats and debts and the proper fatness of the crown's pie. There were lords with grievances that glittered like fishhooks and commoners with burdens that stank like bruises. Ned heard them all. He made Tyreek Lannister, one of the lesser whelps, answer for a squire's cruelty to a washerwoman. He sent word to the Street of Silk that the Queen's stipend for dresses would maintain 2 bakeries in Flea Bottom until winter ended. He put Sare Island pain off twice and saw the tight fold of the man's mouth. He did not send any heads to the spikes that day, though more than one voice whispered that the city might have slept easier if he had. He went to see Cersei in her suite. She received him with her wine and with her eyes half-lidded and her hair braided with such care that Ned thought of a maze. Joffrey glared from a window seat and pretended the air beyond was a kingdom. Tommen played with his toy soldiers, who fought a battle that had no blood. Myrcella stitched, neat and small. "Your Grace," Ned said. He did not sit. "Your Grace," she answered, with the air of one humoring a rich butcher who had blundered into her salon. "How goes it with your new bauble? Have you found where to hang it?" "I have come to speak of your children," he said. "They speak for themselves," Cersei said. "Joffrey, tell the Lord Protector of your sword." Joffrey did not look up. I don't answer to Starks. Ned's mouth thinned. He spoke to Cersei of arrangements, that the princes and princess would be held in comfort with maids and masters and guards, but that they would not leave the holdfast without escort, that they would be tutored in histories not written by Lannister singers, that letters would be sent to their relatives with seals and courtesies. He spoke also of the future. The council will meet on the first day of each fortnight. You may send an emissary. It will not be you. Cersei's smile was as brittle as spun sugar and half as sweet. Do you think me harmless if you keep my claws trimmed? You are a fool. I was married to a fool, and I have bedded fools and beguiled them and turned their foolery to my good. I am not your hind to be penned. You are a lady of the realm, Ned said, and its peace concerns you. If you wish to serve it, instruct your son in humility. Her eyes flashed. He is a lion. He is a boy, Ned said, and took his leave before she could spit more venom that would thicken the air of his lungs. The days gathered speed like a wagon on a hill, and the hill steepened. Edmure's letters grew more frantic, then sober. Lord Tywin was at the Golden Tooth. Tywin had men like leeches, impossible to pry off once they took hold. Ned sent orders and then sent men. The Riverlands needed steel. Robb Stark received his father's first letter in the hall at Winterfell and stood looking at the wax until the firelight picked it out and made it glow. His heart pounded so hard he thought his armor plates would rattle simply from the beat of it. He says to hold, Robb told his gathered bannermen. He says to watch and wait. Great John Umber snorted like a bull elk and slapped the table until the cups went jumping. Hold, while the Riverlands burn, while Lannister piss tosses in our direction and calls it rain. Your father, I honor him, but you are your own man, boy. He is king, Robb said, in a voice that startled them all, himself included. He had not said it aloud before. It did something to his jaw. In the godswood, with the leaves whispering like the breath of old wolves, Robb knelt under the heart tree and pressed his forehead to the bark. He thought of his father's steadiness and of the letters that had spanned the miles between them, heavy with counsel. He went to his mother's solar and found her at the window, looking out at snow that had not yet fallen. He says to hold, mother. What do you say? She asked. He stared down at his hands. He saw boys' scars on them and a man's calluses beginning at his fingers. I say we ride to the Trident with the men we can gather and we meet him there, so that when the lions snap, the jaw that closes on them is made of two halves. She studied him for a long time. Bring the Blackfish, she said finally. Bring him out of Riverrun and to your side. He will be sharper when he is not protecting his brother and fighting the fire in 3 rooms at once. Can I pull him from Edmure? You are a king's son, she said. She reached up and touched his cheek. But you are and will always be my boy. Do not die in a field for pride. He bowed his head. Yes, mother. Men poured through Moat Cailin with the caution of northerners and the urgency of kin. Grey wind ran with the outriders, tongue lolling, joy in his step. He grew thick through the chest as they went, and Robb grew thin in the face. They crossed swamps like a stinking thought and came to the Green Fork. And there the war that Ned had done his best to keep from the city rippled out in circles. He could not stop with 2 hands. In King's Landing, Wyman Manderly arrived with his belly and his books. He bowed until his jowls quivered and then set about the work with a greed for sums that matched a greed for cakes. The treasury's ledgers improved with the first breath he let out in the coin rooms. Peter Baelish, barred from his old pleasures, smiled, and made himself useful in other ways. He whispered to ladies who had jewels, and to men who had more love of those jewels than of their wives. Sansa's days filled with lessons, not of needlework only. Marjorie Tyrell sat with her and combed her auburn hair with deft fingers, and spoke of gardens and games, and listened with an attention that made Sansa's cheeks grow hot. My brother Willis is very wise, Marjorie said one day, watching a dove peck at crumbs on the windowsill. His leg is bad, but his mind is fleet. He breeds hawks and horses and ideas. If a maiden wanted a husband who would be kind, she could do worse. She did not look at Sansa when she said it, which meant of course she looked at her very hard. Catelyn saw the way the Tyrell roses curled around the new crown with delicate thorns, and saw also the way Marjorie's eyes softened when Sansa's laughter escaped like a bird. She spoke with Ned in the quiet of their chamber and said, "Send for Willis. Offer Sansa freely, not to buy half the realm, to bind some of it. You would send away our daughter to a house that played at loving Robert and then played at loving Renly and now plays at loving us?" Ned asked. There was no heat in it. He truly wanted the answer. "They love their gardens," Catelyn said. "Let Sansa be their rarest bloom and let them defend her from frost and blight. Mace will fight for his grandchildren far faster than for any king." Ned closed his eyes. When he opened them, he nodded. Renly, who had waited and smiled and skirmished in the court's corridors, accepted the post of hand when it was given with surprising grace. "I suppose," he said to Loras that night, "if I am to be cheated of one seat, I may as well take another." "You will be near the power," Loras said, kissing his shoulder. "You will pluck petals from it." "If I find any," Renly said. Yet the tension in him eased. He could work from here, shape things, make his realm, or at least his roads, handsomer. Stannis assembled ships at Dragonstone and wrote curt letters couched in terms that admitted no other truth than the one in his head. Some Stormlords answered him out of loyalty to law. Some did not answer at all. Ravens returned with their feet tied to messages full of roses and bread loaves and things that Stannis called softness and Davos called peace. The Red Woman went to the cliffs at night and made the air smell like a burning field. In the Riverlands, Robb forced the crossing at the Twins with words rather than war. "I am the king's son," he told Walder Frey. "I will be back with my father's hand to clasp yours and thank you. I will not be back with men to knock your towers down. Allow us through." He had the sense to let Catelyn do the rest. She spoke to Walder of debt and of the way in which a king could forgive or remember a slight for a very long time, and of marriage ties and grandchildren and graves. Robb rode out with passage purchased by promises. He did not like the taste of it on his tongue. He told Grey Wind, riding at his stirrup, "I'd rather bite the man." And Grey Wind's eyes glinted as if he agreed. The whispering would swallow Jaime Lannister with the same quiet relish with which it swallowed birdsong and the scuff of boots. Robb closed his hand on the Kingslayer not because of cunning beyond measure, but because he was his father's son and had learned to listen. He listened to trees and water and to the old Blackfish, whose voice rasped like a file on iron and whose counsel cut as clean. When Jaime's horse stumbled under a string pulled taut between two oaks and men in leathers poured from the understory like a shadow breaking into pieces, the fight was wild and close. Steel rang dull and muffled where leaves drank sound. Grey Wind tore a man's face half off and shook blood like rain. At the end of it, Jaime's hair hung in his eyes and his face bled and his grin had a crack in it. He recognized in the boy who stepped out to face him a youth trying very hard to stand like a man. "When you play with foxes," Jaime panted, "you set snares. When you play with wolves," Robb returned, breath steadier than he felt, "you find teeth." He did not gloat. He had no taste for it. He had a taste for finishing things. He bound the Kingslayer's hands and sent out riders with torches to keep men from finishing wounded enemies who begged. Word flew with Jaime's chains to every desk in Westeros where strategy sat. At King's Landing, Kevin's mouth tightened. At Casterly Rock, Tywin put his hand flat over a map and did not move it. Ned read the report and felt a measure of release mixed with grief. For men dead in a dark wood. For a war he had bent his back to prevent and still could not call wholly away. He ordered the mountain named Outlaw and his lands forfeit. He sent Beric's name to the sept to be rung at dawn with the bells of prayer. For though men in mail said he was dead, another raven said he was not. Strange things grew in war's soil. He sent also for Cersei. They met again in her rooms, which smelled faintly of lemon cakes and a stronger perfume that did not suit her. Her face was calmer. She held a letter in a hand that did not tremble. "Your son has my brother," she said. "And your father has my river," Ned said. "Trade," she said. "That is not how law functions," he answered. "But peace does like bargains." When Tywin lays down spear and torch and presents himself before the court to answer for the mountain's crimes, When he swears fealty to the crown as any lord must and gives hostages to the peace as any offending lord must, then we will talk of exchanging 1 man for 2. 1 man for 2? She laughed thinly. Joffrey and Myrcella for Jaime? Tommen too, if you like. 3 for 1. A generous bargain. Shall I throw in my father's goodwill, which he keeps in a locked chest no one has ever found the key to? Joffrey will not leave these walls, Ned said. Nor Myrcella, nor Tommen. Their names are inked to T. He peace. She turned away. For a moment, when her shoulder bones made sharp shapes beneath silk, she looked very small and very human. She said without looking at him, "If you were not a Stark, if you were not a man, if you were not so tireless at carrying things no one asks you to pick up, I might almost pity you. Save it for yourself," he said gently. Later, as the day burned low and the sky grayed, he received a letter sealed with a fish in a black field. Brynden Tully, the blackfish, wrote plain as a flensing knife. Tywin had turned at word of his son's capture. He did not ride for the Golden Tooth. He did not ride for the Trident proper. He rode for the Red Fork, and there his men set up tents like wheat before harvest. He was not charging. He was waiting. Ned understood. Tywin was not a lion leaping. He was a lion crouched, letting men come to him. He would hold until leverage came. He would wait to see if Stannis moved, if Renly sharpened, if Dorne slithered. He would send knives into King's Landing. He would buy men like horses. "Come sit with me," Ned said to Varys that evening, and the eunuch did. They shared a dish of stewed lemon and punctured it in small ways, tasting the metal in the sweet. "If 100 knives were to be sent into my house, how would they come?" "In the bread, my lord," Varys said sadly. "Like poison. Who would bake it? Whoever hates hunger less than he loves coin. And who loves coin near me?" Varys spread his soft hands. "I am but a little spider, catching whispers in webs. The men you fear have had decades to spin silks thicker than mine." "Name one," Ned said, and his voice was not gentle. "Janos Slynt," Varys replied, almost with relief. "If you would cut fat. The city watch will follow a full belly. Replace its head. Do it publicly and with thanks to his years of service, as if you were anointing him with butter." Ned did not answer at once. He watched light gather on the black water. He thought of how a man like Slynt might behave when turned out. Would he flee to Tywin? Would he go to Littlefinger? Would he go to ground and sharpen himself like a stake in a ditch, waiting for a boot? He thought too of what it would mean to pass the keys of the city's gates to another hand. He thought of Ser Barristan, old but unbending. He thought of his own men, with their northern eyes, unsuited to city alleys. He thought of the boy with the burned face who had watched the throne room with tired contempt. He sent for Sandor Clegane. They met on a low, cool terrace where the night air could move. Sandor drank and did not offer his cup. "I am not your hound," he said before Ned could speak. "No," Ned agreed, "but you are a hound. You know the smell of rot when it's in the kennel. Janos Slynt serves men who sprinkle their meat with it for flavor." Sandor snorted. "You want me to wear gold? Swive the city's arse and call it my own. I want you to keep the gates and keep the alleys and keep the peace," Ned said. "I want you to do it without selling any of it. And if I have to break some skulls, do it cleanly," Ned said. "And do it yourself, not with boys who like the sound." Sandor looked at him for a long time. His burned side glistened slightly with sweat. He tossed the dregs of wine into the dark. "Fuck Slynt," he said. "I'll do it." The next morning, Janos Slynt received a parchment embossed with the king's new seal. He blanched, then reddened, then bowed and smiled and retired with his pockets heavy. 3 hours later, he was seen in the company of men with Lannister red on their cuffs. 2 days later, he was seen no more within the walls. A week later, a boat out of King's Landing bore a man with a belly and a mind for survival to a place where the rock's shadow fell long and golden. "War by inches," Catelyn said that night, when news of the change rippled through the court like a breeze. "It is slower than war by miles, but the dead pile up just the same." "It buys time," Ned said, Every inch we take in quiet is an inch my son does not bleed for. She pressed her forehead to his. You cannot hold winter back with your hands. Then I will hold what I can, he said. Stannis sailed at last. A modest fleet, lean, the sails stiff in a hard wind. Davos stood on his deck and watched the gulls and the dark ribbon that was the Blackwater. He had argued, he had been ignored, he had argued again. Beware wildfire, he told his liege, though there was no reason yet to suspect that any had been made. Beware tricks. I fear only sin, Stannis said. And law. He wore his truth around him like plate. The fleet came halfway up the Blackwater under a half-moon, and men on the city's walls rubbed sleep from their eyes and tried to gauge the number of sails. The bells rang. Ned woke, and the city unrolled itself like a snake rousing. He had not prepared like Tyrion would have in another world. He had not spanned the river with chain. He had not ordered pots of wildfire hurled. He had sent for every shipmaster he could find, and he had placed archers in ranks, and he had made the hounds' men drill until the gold on their cloaks chafed off. He had sent ravens to Driftmark and to House Redwine, and fat old Paxter had smiled and said nothing, and then sent 20 ships of his own. He had strengthened the towers and posted men at the mud gate like teeth. The battle at the Blackwater was not a blaze of witchfire that turned men to screaming candles. It was the slow, grinding work of wood into wood and iron into flesh. Arrows fell like rain where the wind shifted to a bad humor and sent them sideways into men's throats. Ships locked like deer and bellowed with the weight of men leaping from one to another. Davos kept his ship where he could do the most good and the least reporting, and when one of Renly's pretty galleys, lent in friendship and calculation, came alongside him, he saw Loras Tyrell on the castle wall with a face set hard Ugh to chisel. On the city side, a man with a burned face cut a path along the docks like a plow in a field left too long to thorn. He swore a steady stream while he worked. He hated fire, but he hated panic more. His men learned quickly that the best way to keep their heads was to keep their boots planted and their blades honest. From a tower, Ned watched, heart beating measured as if he could lend it to the city. He heard the hiss of bolts and the guttural, wet grunts of men dying, and he kept to himself the thought that he had never wanted to hear such sounds again, and that he had heard them in half the fields of the realm already. Stannis himself came with the third wave, grim-faced and tireless, and he was the first on the bridge when they threw planks across two ships bucking side by side to bring steel from sea to stone. Ned met him at the top of the quay steps, not with a sword drawn but with a line of pikemen behind him and Barristan Selmy at his side, bareheaded and white. The two men looked at each other as the air filled with the chatter of arrows and the thunder of rope and the groan of wood. "Lord Stark," Stannis said. "Or should I say, it is a false day to trade titles," Ned returned. His sword point was down, the blade streaked with fish oil and human. "Lay down arms. Enter the city to speak, not to conquer. Swear by your god or mine or both that you will not light the fuse you have come to set." Stannis's jaw worked. Behind him, Davos looked past his liege to the white-cloaked old man at the king's shoulder and thought of the old days, when things had seemed clean and had rusted anyway. He said nothing. He knew the shape of stubbornness. He had polished it with his own hands. "Your crown is a lie," Stannis said. "You cannot bind the realm with lies, even for the sake of peace. Peace based on wrongness is rot. It caves in when a man leans on it." "Then help me rebuild it true," Ned snapped, sharper than he meant to. "Come into the city. Stand before the people. Let the High Septon weigh our words. If you prove to the realm that you can rule without drowning it in blood, I shall lay my crown at your feet. Do you hear me, Stannis? I will give it up. But if you take it by force and set the river running red, you will live to see children starving in alleys because you were right the wrong way." Stannis stared at him, at the stubbornness nestled in the set of his shoulders, at the clean set of his mouth. He looked past him at the Tower of the Hand, at the Seven Sept, at the squat ugliness of the Red Keep. He looked into himself. He had come to the city to strip it of pretense. He had come to pull down weak men and replace them with truth. The thought of entering and finding a chair without fire on it, without the cleansing heat he had been promised, thickened his throat. "Swear it," he said at last. His voice was iron. "You swear, by all the gods you will not name, to call the council within the year and present to it my claim without prejudice, and to abide by its judgment either way?" "I swear," Ned said. If he was lying, he did not know. He felt the truth on his tongue, tasted like blood and snow. Somewhere behind Stannis, the Red Woman hissed, a coal refusing to go out. Stannis lifted his sword and pointed it to the sky. "Stand down," he told his men, and the word was a call that fell over the fighting and smothered it almost at once. Some men died anyway in the last heartbeats because they were busy dying already. The river carried their blood away in skinny ropes. They spoke 6 hours in a chamber whose tapestries smelled like dust and old moths. Renly sat and listened, and between him and his brother lay all the distance of their natures. Stannis set out his claim like a case in a law court. Ned answered him with the shape of the realm and with the count of its wounds. Stannis said that wounds festered when left to heal crooked. Ned said that bones set with too much force shattered. Davos watched his lord's hands and saw in their clench the measure of this day's failure. Peace fed men. War made profit only for a few, and the rest ate death. Davos had learned to count losses early and had kept his fingers tallying even after Stannis had shortened them by 4. He was loyal. He was also tired. In the end, they signed a piece of parchment that said nothing at great length. The king would maintain his crown as steward of peace. Stannis would withdraw his ships, take bread, and proceed to Dragonstone. In 1 year, the Great Council would sit again. Stannis would be heard. Before then, Tywin Lannister would come to heel. If he did not, the king and Stannis both would put their steel to his hide. For once, the thought of a common enemy almost made brothers of stone and ice. The paper was sealed. The men washed their hands. The year that followed was a year in which men bent their backs as if a harvest hung on each day and a storm crouched on each night's horizon. Tywin came because Jaime was bound in a tent with his hands tied, and a boy with a wolf for a brother telling him he would eat and be walked like a dog in the mornings until a bargain was struck. Tywin came because Casterly Rock still cast long shadows over coasts he did not control, and because couriers brought him not good offers but proof that his name bled power in the capital where once it had poured it like wine. He came with banners and honor and lawyers. He entered King's Landing under flags of truce that looked to Ned's eye like skinned cats stretched on poles. He stood before the throne and bowed, and did not cross the floor seam where kings ended and petitioners began. He swore fealty. He spoke of a son's boyhood, of a woman whose father had been burned by another king whom Ned had helped, of the way in which much lies within the letter and much bleeds out at its edges. He promised restitution for the mountain's raids. He offered gold instead of a head. Ned said no. He demanded tea. He had and gave names. Gregor Clegane was dragged from his keep at Harrenhal by men Robb sent and men the Blackfish pressed, and he came snarling and leering and died with a stubbornness that made the sword that took him bite twice. Oberyn Martell came to watch and smiled like a man who had won a bet with himself. "The lion pays," he said, not loudly, when the head fell. Ned did not smile. He did not watch. He could not stop hearing the sound. In the north, winter came to the edges of letters and pressed them brittle. The wall sent ravens of its own, speaking not of wildling trickery only but of dead men walking. Jeor Mormont wrote in a hand that had lost none of its steadiness. He asked for men, and he asked for food, and he asked for the king to remember that the wall was the line beyond which all talk of crowns turned to mud. Ned read the letter and felt something icy turn in the deep wood of him. He called his council and did not care whether Littlefinger smiled or whether Renly was bored and whether Mace scratched his belly and thought of sweet rolls. "We will feed the watch," he said. "We will send men to the watch. We will punish any lord who keeps good men from it because a border needs them more than a wall. The wall needs them more than any border." "You mean to empty our levees?" Kevin Lannister said, practical, not unkind. "I mean to keep the night," Ned said. "If the night holds, the day continues and we can argue over vineyards and sheepfolds tomorrow." Renly rubbed his lip and did not smile. "We will need to make the watch handsome," he said. No one sends their boy where the songs call him a joke. Then write new songs, Marjorie said lightly from the benches. We will see to them in the reach. Loras, you will wear black for a month and make the color look like victory. Loras blinked. Then he grinned. I will make it look like a lover. Robb rode to the capital with the Kingslayer in his train and an air of triumph. He did not permit to settle into swagger. He did not trust triumph. He delivered Jaime into the city quietly, under cloaks and at night, and watched as the man with the golden hair and the smile of a blade uniformed himself in irony and did not break. Jaime faced his father in the throne room the next day under the eyes of 1,000 courtiers and did not look away once. Tywin did not look at him often. He looked instead at Eddard, at Robb, at the old man in white. If there was a crack, it showed only as a deepening of the line between his brows. The price was paid at last for peace. Tywin bent, Jaime chained, Gregor's head lifted. The city ate again. Men came home to farms that had been trampled only once, not every week. Women put down their knotted hands at dusk and did not listen for hooves or for the snap of a line of fire in a field. The year crept toward its end. The council prepared to sit again. Across the narrow sea, a girl who called herself Khaleesi sat in the shadow of a man dying and felt 3 eggs grow heavy in her hands. Drogo, who had ridden with a wind in his hair like sky, coughed and stared at a tense stitched roof. His life went out of him like a tide when the moon was old. The girl wrapped his body and lit the pyre herself and stepped into it and came out with fire clinging to her like a lover. The 3 eggs cracked and screamed. She stood in ash with dragons clinging to her shoulders and hair burned away and eyes that reflected flame. The Dothraki fell to their knees and called her mother and wondered if she would devour them. Ships on the Jade Sea heard stories. Merchants in Karth counted probabilities. Spies in Illyrio's manse wrote with quills that trembled slightly, and a eunuch in King's Landing received the news and let his eyes close for a long breath. He wondered which part of his web would catch such a creature, and whether he wished it to catch it all. Ned read the report and felt a cold curiosity. He had been a boy when dragons' shadows roamed these walls. He had read of the trident's steam rising when pendants hissed across it. He wrote to Stannis, who responded with scorn. He wrote to Doran, who sent back courtesy and silence. He wrote to Daenerys Stormborn in care of Illyrio, and the letter returned briefly with the same seal and a line in a careful hand. The queen would speak when she pleased. Winter tightened. The godswood in the Red Keep grew haggard and stubborn. Sansa's betrothal to Willis Tyrell was ratified with bread-breaking and with a quiet ceremony in which Mace Tyrell cried again and loudly. Willis arrived, kind and clever-eyed, and spoke with Sansa of Hawks. She found that when his hand shook a little at the hinge of his bad leg, she wanted to steady it, and not because her mother watched. Arya scowled and learned to put her knife down when she should and pick it up when she must. She continued to call her water dancing and her dancing masters liars if they said anything about rigid wrists. Myrcella smiled at her with shy curiosity, and Tommen let her teach him to roll on the floor with a direwolf pup that had arrived from Winterfell and answered only to Nymeria. Cersei drank more and smiled less and found no sympathetic ears in rooms that once had been full of them. She coiled that rage into a ball and kept it behind her tongue. She visited the sept and knelt and whispered scriptures under her breath, as if she could make the words return a crown to her son's head through piety alone. Joffrey plotted in small ways and was thwarted in larger ones. He began to understand that the world did not rearrange itself to his liking merely because he stamped his foot. That understanding made him so angry he beat a squire with a wooden sword until the boy's father, newly bold in a city where the Lord Protector had become king and the Hound suffered no petty cruelty, pulled the prince away and took a slap that left his cheekbone purple. Sandor watched and then trained Joffrey twice as hard the next day in the morning sun until the boy vomited. "You want to be a man," the Hound said. "You'll learn the taste of bile." The great council met again under a sky like iron. Stannis came this time. He sat as if he had been carved and then sat down. He spoke, and his words had the sting of truth and the blindness of it too. He did not charm, he did not attempt it. He argued numbers like a master of coin and the old law like a maester. He said that Eddard's crown was an abomination and that peace bought with dishonor was a whore on a throne. You cannot keep it, even if men do not revolt at once, he said. It will rot. Ned let him speak until he had bruised himself against the walls of his own certainty. When his turn came, he stood and said, I do not love the thing I wear. I do not ask the realm to change the bones of how it names its rulers. I ask it to hear the cry of hunger and of fear and to weigh it against the law's letter. Stannis Baratheon is Robert's heir, trueborn and legitimate. If you choose him, I will kneel this afternoon and carry my crown to him who mislikes crowns but will wear one because the letter demands it. If you choose Renly, I will keep peace with him if I can, though I will call you fools. If you choose me, I will keep it another season and then give it back to you. But choose. Do not let winter choose for you. They chose Eddard again. The priests anointed him again. Stannis' eyes narrowed to blade slits. In one more year, he said afterward, voice like frost, you will bring those men back to this chamber and you will pry their mouths open and force the law into them. He threw back his cloak and left. Davos followed, hand to his cap, thinking that gods laughed when men believed they had purchased the future in tidy parcels. The letter from the wall that spring broke like ice in a river when it thaws and roars all at once. The old bear wrote fewer words this time. He wrote of Mance Raider's numbers and of dead things that moved like men when the night wind was in the trees. He wrote of Benjen Stark's horse returning riderless and of ravens refusing to go into the dark. He wrote of scouts that did not return and of a great shadow where no clouds lay. Ned did not call council. He did not write speeches. He put a cloak about his shoulders that smelled of Jon's youth, and he rode north with a train that made the capital hold its breath. He left Renly to keep the seat and left Catelyn to keep the city alive, which she did by walking into kitchens and counting barrels with her own hands and listening to women's talk. He left Sansa to daydream on balconies with a gentle man who loved books and hounds. He left Arya to score another notch on an imaginary list and to sleep with her knife under her pillow more often than she admitted. He took with him Ser Barristan, whose heart stood taller than his knees would like. He took with him a guard of Northmen who could smell frost coming. He took with him a king's duty and a father's dread. The wall rose and filled the horizon like a story that turned out to be true. Ned looked up at it and felt small and young and not unpleased with it. He went through the gate and into black that had no warmth and every kind of loyalty in it. Jorah Mormont took his arm and said, "You came. How could I not?" Ned asked. His voice condensed into a ghost before him. "Where is my son?" "In the field," Gior said. "Beyond." He went with the half hand to climb and to look. "He will return." He said it as a command. Jon returned 4 days later with windburned cheeks and a face that had learned more than a boy's share. He looked at Ned and stood stiff, and then, when the room had emptied, he stepped forward and embraced his father in silence. Ned held him and felt the beat of a heart like his own, steady and stubborn. He thought of telling him everything at once. Lie in his bed, promises made and kept, the heat and the blood and the lemon-scented room where a prince sang softer than men thought he could. He did not. He looked at the boy's face and saw the man pressing behind it and said, "There are things I will tell you when the sky is a kinder color. For now, you will have men and grain and steel and my oath that this wall will not be starved." "It won't be enough," Jon said. "We saw," he stopped. "We saw something that the words won't carry." "Then carry steel," Ned said, because he could not carry anything else. They set to digging out old forges and making nails and repairing roofs that had sagged under snow and under neglect. They sent to Mole's Town for whores and found that some of them would rather feed men than lie with them if it came to that. They came up with quilts and with bread. They wrote letters as if they could sting the dead with them. Ned walked the wall at night and watched the north and wondered how long a man could hold his breath. When Daenerys Targaryen's ship came to Dragonstone under a flag of truce, Stannis looked at it for a very long time as if he might scorch it with the heat of his stare. The girl came ashore with dragons as thin as snakes and twice as quick, perched ugly and beautiful upon her shoulders. She was not a girl truly. She was a mother in the way only those are who have birthed things larger than themselves. Her eyes met Stannis's and did not flinch. She bowed to him, which many would have used as a dagger, and did not. She asked to be taken to the king. "Why?" Stannis asked, ignoring courtesy as a dog ignores rain. "Because winter comes," she said. "And dragons like the taste of snow even less than men do." She folded her hands. "And because I am what I am, and I would ask him if he remembers the promise he made in a room that smelled of blood and summer flowers." Stannis's face did not change, but Davos felt an old wind curl up his sleeves. He put Dany aboard his own small ship because he could not stop it and because he understood something about bringing fire into rooms. When Eddard Stark met the last Targaryen in his hall, where the skulls of other dragons were long gone, he stood very still. He had been 17 when he had last seen a dragon close enough to trace its jaw with his eyes. He had gotten his sister out of a tower that day, but he had not gotten her home alive. He saw Lyanna in the slope of this girl's cheek for the half of a heartbeat it took his mind to betray him. "You know who I am," the girl said. Her hair was silver, and if the light caught it wrong, it looked like frost that would not melt. "You are your father's daughter," Ned said. He heard formal words come out of his mouth. They were the right ones and they felt like stones. "And your brother's sister." "I am also a queen," she said. "I am also a mother twice over, and all my children are hungry." She tilted her head. "And you are a king who never wanted to be and who will end up being what the realm needs, not what it wants, because that is what men like you do until it breaks them or makes them songs after they die. You learned to talk in Karth," he said. "You learned to listen elsewhere." "I learned to bleed," she said, "and to not die when it would have been easier. I will not take your city with fire. I will not burn your people to char the crowns off their lords. I want a place by your side when you call your council next. Or you can kill me now and send my little ones into the alleys to be beaten by boys with clubs." There was a time when he would have sent for Ser Island Pain for no more than the reason that this girl laid in the air between them. There was a time when he would have tied a sack of stones to her neck with his own hands and lowered her into a river and prayed afterward. That time had been before the wall called, before a boy in black had looked at him and said the words would not carry. The world had grown more dangerous and more narrow since then. He could smell its breath. He did not bend the knee and he did not order hers bent. He called Catelyn in and he called Renly and he called Stannis and he called Oberyn and Kevin and Mace. He called the High Septon. They sat around a table that smelled of polish and patience and spoke in low voices that rose and fell like a sea's edge. The dragons curled in a hearth where no fire dared be lit and hissed and slept and were fed bits of meat by a girl in whose fingers they did not yet suspect betrayal. In the end, they wrote another promise that pleased no one fully and thus, perhaps, pleased the realm. Daenerys would be named Protector of the East, a title with no teeth and sharp edges, and given Dragonstone's castle as her hearth in exchange for oaths sworn over salt and iron and under the Seven's eyes that she would bring her fire against winter and not against the city's thatch. She would attend the council and be heard as if her blood gave her a claim, which it did and did not. She would send riders with blue lips to the wall and see what ice looked like from close. She smiled when the ink dried, and it was not a child's smile. "You are not like the stories," she told Ned that night, quiet in a corridor where her dragons climbed a tapestry and laughed their tiny, hard laughter. "The wolf who would not be a king and now is one. The woman who died for love and for a lie. The man who lied for love and has told the truth ever since. The songs are less complicated." "The songs lie," he said. "I know." She touched the rough stones with the tips of her fingers as if to read them. "I know many lies. I also know that winter is not a story." When the armies of the dead came with whispers and with frost that crept into the joints of men's armor and their bones, the wall shook like a drum. Jon Snow stood upon it with Qhorin Halfhand's lessons hard in him and Longclaw heavy as a friend. He had seen a red-haired woman die in another world. In this one, he had watched her ride away toward a hill dark with ravens and had not shot. He had learned not to shoot when the world might need every arrow for the dark. Ghost moved like wind along the wall's top. He bared his teeth in a rictus that was not a smile. Men came from south to stand at the bottom of that ice. They wore roses and lions, krakens and suns, stags and trout, eagles and pine trees, and a dozen sigils no song would bother to memorize. They brought their corals with them and laid them down at a line in the snow because someone had told them to and because they could see the reason in their breath. Eddard Stark rode along that line and looked each lord in the eye and did not ask them for more than he had brought himself. He had a furred hood up and his breath ghosted out to meet them each in turn. He looked older than in the city and younger than in his grief. He looked like a man who had accepted that he might die and was bothered only by whether his death would land in the right ledger. The battle that followed filled the world. It had no fields and no drums. It had screaming, and it had a silence worse than any screaming when the things in black learned to make the sound of ice breaking underfoot and use it to drive men mad. Dragons came, Stannis' oath woven into their smoke, and breathed blue-white flame down upon things that refused to turn to ash. The fire cracked like a whip and left behind snow that steamed. The old magics, it turned out, were hungry and had never learned refined tastes. They ate men and monsters and did not distinguish with the delicacy one might have wished. Jon's sword found a thing's neck and bit and broke and left behind an absence that filled slowly with light. He learned the weight of each heartbeat as if it were coin. When the morning came because it could, not because men had summoned it, there were bodies like driftwood in strange shapes and men alive who would never stop dreaming. Ned walked among them until his knees shook and his hands forgot the difference between blood and snow. He found Jon last, sitting on a broken bit of the wall with Goze. T's head in his lap, his eyes raw. Ned sat beside him and said nothing for a while. The air hurt his teeth. "I know," Jon said at last, as if taking up a conversation they had left 50 years ago in a warm room. "I know that you lied for me. I know that I am not your son. I know that I am. I have looked at the shape of the lie and I have looked at the shape of the world, and the lie fits more kindly." Ned's hands tightened upon his knees until his nails left crescents. He let out a breath he had been carrying since a tower in a land of summer. "When your mother died," he said, and could not say her name yet, "I swore, and I kept swearing to myself, to your uncle, to the dark. If you hate me for it—" "I don't," Jon said. He leaned his head back against the ice and closed his eyes. "I don't hate anyone. I am tired." "Rest then," Ned murmured. He felt the broken places in himself settle and shift. They would never stop grinding. He could live with that. Winter did not break that day. It did not break that month. It broke as it does, in 100 tiny places at once. Where a roof held and a child was born and a man lived through the night when his fever had made his wife put a knife by his head in case he rose with eyes like mirrors. It broke when Daenerys let children touch a dragon's scarred flank and when one of those children did not draw back. It broke when Stannis walked into a chapel and sat in silence while the Red Priestess glared at him from the door and finally left. It broke in the Red Keep when Cersei threw a cup at a wall and watched the wine run like blood and begin to dry and did not weep. It broke when Sansa learned the names of every baker in Flea Bottom and every midwife and every butcher with a soft heart and a hard fist and sent them bread and sent them coin and sent them a word they could carry to others that this new day would have food in it. It broke when Arya came into the hall with a dirt-streaked face and eyes that had become less like knives and more like flint, and the little Prince Tommen grinned at her and showed her how the pup had learned to beg. The summer that came was not the endless golden thing of bards. It was cautious and had weeds in it and taxes and old griefs. Came all the same. Eddard Stark took off his crown in a hall that smelled of beeswax and apples and set it on a table between him and the lords of the realm. He said, "We have kept our oaths. We have kept peace. We have kept each other alive." He looked at Stannis and did not smile. "Now we will keep the law. If you put this crown upon my head again, I will not wear it a day more. Choose." They chose, not without argument, not without a night spent in corners whispering. Some counted blood still, some counted bread, some counted dragons and shivered. In the end, they chose a thing like a river. It had bends and mud and fish and fed fields no man could see from shore. They chose to keep Eddard another year and walked home through a city that did not burn. Catelyn met him in the garden behind the solar, where lemons somehow dared in pots. She held up a small vial. "Maester says it will help your knee," she said. "It tastes foul." "I have eaten worse," he said. He took the vial and swallowed and made a face. She smiled, and then her face wavered and she let out the breath she had been saving for a year or for 20. He took her hand. "We are not finished," he said. "We are never finished," she said. "That is why we must rest when we can." They sat, their shoulders touching, their hands laced. The city hummed below them. Somewhere a dragon shrieked, a high, arrogant sound that belonged to another age. Somewhere a boy laughed. Somewhere a girl cursed and spat and threw a knife at a straw target and hit it. Somewhere a man with a burned face took off his helm and let the air move across skin that did not forgive. Somewhere a Lannister counted and gave some of what he counted to a boy who had swept his stable well. Robb stood in the God's Wood at Winterfell and listened to the leaves and to gray winds breathing at his back. He had been to war and to court and to the edge of the world. He had learned that being a man was not something that happened because a sword was belted to you. He put his hand upon the heart tree and said, quietly, "I will keep it." He meant the north. He meant the river. He meant a promise to a father that was not always a king and to himself that was not always a boy. He smiled without knowing it and felt the bark under his palm rough and true. The realm made no song about Eddard the Winter King while he lived. It made bread instead. It made roads that did not wash out after the first hard rain. It made a list of names of the dead and read them aloud every year on the day the first frost took a garden. It made certain that the wall did not starve. It named no day for a battle and many days for a harvest. It kept bellies full enough that mothers did not sell their milk to men with coins and sick eyes. It was imperfect. It was alive. When the crown at last passed from Eddard's hands and did not cut them open, when he knelt and named the man who would wear it because the law could finally bear its own weight without splintering, there were men in the back of the hall who sighed as if they had been holding an iron pot to their chest for too long. Stannis swore on both gods without irony. Renly laughed and did not stand to be seen laughing, and that was perhaps the truest change of all. Daenerys watched with her dragons coiled and, for once, did not think of fire but of rain. Catelyn wept in a quiet way that did not break her face. Sansa sang that night and Arya did not mock her. Jon stood by a window that looked north and thought of ice cracking, and smiled without feeling as if he were betraying anyone when he did. The songs came later, sung by men who had not bled on snow or in alleys. They were prettier than the truth and less kind. But when children at last asked what it had been like, those who had lived it did not always answer with words. Sometimes they answered with loaves of bread, still warm, pressed into small hands. Sometimes they answered by taking a child to a wall and showing him where the world ended and began at once. Sometimes they answered by holding out a hand in a hall where men argued and making them stop. At dusk, in the God's Wood of the keep that had never been his and always had been, Eddard Stark sat beneath leaves that remembered secrets and listened to water. He did not think of crowns. He thought of Lyanna, and he thought of Robert chasing a boar, and he thought of a girl with dragons and a boy with a blade of old iron and the silence between two heartbeats in a city that had not burned because men had chosen to carry something harder than fire. He closed his eyes and prayed in the old words that did not have shape to them and did not tell stories. And when he opened them again, the light on the water looked like something he could bear. He rose, stiff in the joints as men do who have carried too much, and went to supper.